Hello, fellow pizzeria and/or megaplex customers, as well as any haunted animatronic lore enthusiasts, and welcome to King of the What Now, a channel that is less and less about One Piece every day. Although Foxy, the animatronic, is a pirate, and there's a Foxy the Pirate in One Piece, and Foxy the animatronic, he does music stuff, so he'd be the perfect fit for the Rumbar Pirates. No. That's not what we're here for today. We've got to focus on the deceased children. Always a fun topic. Now, before we start, I do want to say this channel is not going to become a dedicated FNAF space. It simply cannot. But I have a few ideas, maybe 2 or 3 bumping around my head that I just wanted to get out to the wider internet, in case that interests you. And though I've watched a totally normal amount of Five Nights at Freddy's content on the internet and know quite a bit of the lore, I'd say pretty well, I'm not perfect. Never have been. I still get confused anytime anyone talks about, baby's rental and services and, where it needs to go, here or there in the timeline. Those details just confuse me, It's like someone trying to explain the plot of Kingdom Hearts to someone else who's never heard of it, and also the two individuals don't speak the same language and don't understand each other. Completely different languages, like Chinese and German levels of differences. That's what it feels like when people talk about certain aspects of the lore, and I get confused every single time. And if I get details wrong, that's okay, right? Please don't, flame me in the comments. You can let me know with a nice comment like, hey, I think you forgot about this one paragraph from this one obscure book that's out of print but is technically still in canon. And I will say, oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. I'm sorry. I missed it. And also, there's always new FNAF content coming out. For example, when I started writing this essay, the Secret of the Mimic trailer had not yet come out, and so I hadn't seen that, and maybe there's some information in that trailer that changes our understanding of the lore. Return to the Pit has come out, and I haven't finished reading it all the way, and so I've heard that it has a couple of, hints that maybe the timeline isn't what we thought it was, or, when certain things are placed. Look, like I said, I'm not perfect. I needed to get this essay out, and I wanted to get it recorded and edited and released before the actual Secret of the Mimic game came out, because that's going to take place earlier in the timeline, all this other stuff. So I have to draw a line. I have to say all my knowledge up until the point when I recorded this essay, or wrote it, that's all that I'm going to use. And also, I might be missing some clues from even earlier in the timeline, because again, I got a brain full of rocks. With all of those disclaimers out of the way, I think it's time for Who Died First in Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, this is a mystery that's still debated in the community to this day, after a bunch of games. I think we almost have 20 of them at this point. And arguably, we also have a ton of books that might clarify or clutter the timeline. But whether they count for the official canon is also a debate. So someone really should just solve this series, just make one video and explain succinctly exactly what is going on. It shouldn't take more than 10, 15 minutes tops, And then, as another teeny tiny note, this is just a side note, it has nothing to do with what I'm actually talking about. The day I finished the first draft of this script was the same day that Hyperdroid released a video on this exact topic, Who Died First. And for a second, I was like, oh no, did he and I have the same idea at the same time, and he got his video out first. But after watching the video, he and I used different silver bullets, our final conclusion was different, and how we got there was different, so no worries. You can watch his video, you can watch my video, we can both be right in our own ways. That's the fun of FNAF, is that none of this is actually real. By which I mean none of this is really hard confirmed, except for a couple of things, you know what I mean? I'm also going to be, because like I said, I've watched quite a few of the big theorists, and I'm going to be a little upset if after I release this, someone just links me to, Rytoast or Gibby's Horror Homestead or ID's Fantasy. If any big YouTuber has come out with a video that talks about this exact point with the exact same logic that I'm using, I'm going to be, I'm going to be a little frustrated, because I thought that I did my research, but maybe there's something I missed. Now first, let's meet our contestants. And I do mean meet, M-E-A-T, am I right? That's a little death humor for you. In my opinion, throughout all of the series, we have 4 major candidates for the first death. And I do want to say, I mean death, not murder. That distinction is going to be important as we get into the details of this theory. And I also want to say that a meaningful death has to be something that happened on screen or that we know has happened, such as the missing children's incident, right? We don't see that on camera in the gameplay of FNAF 1, but we know it happened because it was in the newspaper. It's been confirmed in a bunch of other games since then. And it also has to be a meaningful death that impacted the wider universe, the story that is being told. You know, maybe William Afton's grandfather died in 1916, but like, as far as we can tell, that death didn't have a major impact on things. So, you know, that didn't have any impact on the haunted animal animatronics. And Jackie, who's mostly human, and BB, who's a boy, and okay, bad point. Haunted animatronics in general. So for our 4 candidates, we have Susie, the girl possessing Chica, the girl we call Charlie, the girl possessing the puppet, Elizabeth Afton, the girl possessing Circus Baby, and Dave Afton, aka the crying child, who may or may not be possessing Fredbear, or might be possessing the whole pizzeria, or might not be possessing anything at all. What Dave possesses is not important to this discussion. We still know he died. We still know that his death had an impact. If we were shown it, it certainly impacted Mike Afton. And it might have affected William for one reason or another, but we just won't know until Scott or someone decides to directly characterize some of their characters, which could start at any point. At any point, they could try to go back and give a little bit more character to their characters. Before I discuss these 4 major candidates, as I call them, I want to go over some honorable mentions. Characters who don't need as much analysis, because I just don't think that they count. Like, it's very easy to say, this person doesn't count for X, Y, or Z reason. Here's why I am not going to talk about them in this video essay. First, we have David Murray, son of Edwin Murray, from the books about the Mimic. And like I said earlier, maybe when that game comes out, it will turn out that his death had a ripple effect that caused everything else down the timeline. Maybe he possesses the Mimic, right? Maybe he possesses the Tiger Rock plushie. Maybe he cried on it and his grief caused it to come to life, because that's how it happened in the books with Charlie and the Ella doll. But firstly, that game isn't out yet, so it's impossible for me to say what information will be in it, how that will affect our understanding of the lore, where it is in the timeline, although heavily speculated, or it's very clearly indicated it's in 1979, just like how FNAF 4 was very clearly told to us that it was about the Bite of 87 when it was, in pre-production, all that stuff. Also, I do not believe that when Scott was writing the original story, let's say everything up until Pizza Sim, right? The first 7 games, or the first 6 games. We can even count Ultimate Custom Night and get to that 7 number. There's no way he knew about a character called the Mimic who was built by a man named Edwin Murray, who was earlier in the timeline than we've ever possibly known at. It is just impossible. I refuse to believe it. All right? He had tried to end the series 4 times up until that point, and I think that the Mimic is in the 5th reboot of the series with the Steel Wool era. It's a new character for this new era. And look at this, me spending a paragraph of my essay to explain about a character I, quote, do not need to spend a lot of time talking about, unquote. Okay, next, Andrew. Andrew is disqualified because I'm only interested in who died first in the games, and I have seen no compelling evidence that Andrew is in the games. I suppose there was a Stitch Wraith appearance in the Into the Pit video game, the second telling of that story, but also is Into the Pit main games canon? Who knows, right? Feel free to debate it in the comments. I personally don't think that Andrew is in the games, and if he is, it's gonna be a bloody retcon, I'll tell you what. That's something that someone just made up and they decided to put another character in there that wasn't in the original story. And then, of course, there's one other person who might have died early in the timeline. There's a possibility that a time-traveling Michael Afton with Fazbear Entertainment branded electrical powers, lightning powers, has come back in time to prevent all of the deaths. He's gonna get William Afton before his son dies. Maybe he would get Henry in that case, but maybe he's coming back in time. He's going to fix the timeline, prevent all of the deaths. Now, as cool and obvious as this idea would be, we know that it's going to happen eventually, but the death wouldn't actually be at the beginning of the story. You see what I'm saying? This time-traveling Michael Afton, he came back in time to prevent the deaths that already happened. So even if he died in 1975 while trying to stop his father and or Henry, then it doesn't matter, because that's not the first death that caused everything, because time travel is super fun to deal with narratively. With the honorable mentions out of the way, we have 4 characters that I think might have died first, and I think that 2 of them are much stronger candidates than the other 2. So I'm going to talk about the first 2 in ascending order of likelihood, aka the least likely and the second least likely. And once we've talked about them, I can move on. And let's do it this way. I'm going to list all of the information that I can remember or was able to find about each of these characters, about why it might be believed that they were the ones who died first in the timeline. And then it will be my job to counter-argue that. I'm going to say, this is why I don't like the evidence, here's how the evidence could be reinterpreted that could mean that they didn't necessarily die first. First, we have Elizabeth Afton. The only 2 reasons I can really think of that she might be the first who died is because A, her room is empty in the FNAF 4 8-bit minigames, and B, who the heck knows when Circus Babies opened, right? I already mentioned that. I have no idea. But actually, after writing this section, I also remembered that she was young when she was killed, right? We've had those voice lines in Sister Location. She didn't seem to be like a teenager, for example, right? And so if the Aftons already had a room for the sister in the FNAF 4 8-bit minigames, that means that either she was far enough along, that Mrs. Afton was far enough along in the pregnancy that they knew it was a girl, or Elizabeth Afton was already born. So if she died, let's pick a random, let's say she died when she was 10. I think she was probably younger than that based off of how her voice sounds, but if she died at 10, if she was already, say, 4 in the 8-bit minigames, and she died at 10, then it's only 6 years, and 6 years already puts it past the first. You see what I'm saying, though, right? Like, if she was already young in the 8-bit minigames, and she died young, maybe they happened around the same time. Maybe that puts her earlier in the timeline. Who knows? So firstly, that empty room that we see. Now, there's no reason that she couldn't just be outside eating ice cream. She might be visiting her aunt, right? She might be with Mrs. Afton. Who knows, right? We don't see Michael in his room, and we don't have much speculation that Michael was already dead by the time that FNAF 4 came out, by the time the bite happened. He seems very much alive, right? We don't even see William Afton's room. He might not even exist. He might just be a figment of our imagination. But now, let's talk about the timeline placement, which is a trickier point, because I don't have a clue. Some people might have clues, but are they right? Who knows? You know? Does Scott Cawthon actually know when Sister Location opened up, or does he just have like this timeline in his office and there's just a big question mark? He's like, I'll let the theorists figure it. Matt and Tom, they can figure it out. They'll tell me what the story is. But here's my thing. I don't like the idea of the fun times being around in, say, 1983. That breaks my immersion. Yes, we have ghosts. Yes, we have facial recognition in 1987. But, like, the fun times seem so sophisticated. I just can't believe that they exist this early in the timeline. Even if Scott or Steel Wool comes out and says, yes, the fun times were made in 1960 and they killed Elizabeth Afton in 1963, I just won't be able to believe that, right? You're going to have to give me an explanation as to how they were able to create such advanced robots in this universe. And think of it this way. If you think of the timeline of, like, progressing technology, you can look at the 1970s Fall Fest era as this time when you had humans, like regular people, in fur costumes, or whatever you would call that. There'd basically be no technology involved, and it would just be a bunch of actors. And then you have early 1980s, you would have the Springlock suits. Maybe earlier than 1980s, I don't know. Maybe they premiered in 1983 with Fredbear's Family Diner. But you have these Springlock suits that are kind of a mix. You have human actors in them when they're off the stage, and you have them in animatronic mode when they're on the stage. I could be wrong, but I don't know if we ever see the animatronics roaming about, not on the stage. I think it's always a human in the costume, and maybe that's because the technology is limited. They have to stay on the stage on their charging stations. They can't move around. And then a little while later, by at least 1985, right, we have the animatronics that can walk around. They can go into free roam mode and all that stuff. You have Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Not Spring Bonnie, regular Bonnie. And then the next leap in technology could be the Fun Times. Now, this is just a personal theory of mine. I don't have proof, but to me it just makes sense that it would happen like that. I also kind of like the narrative idea that the first 4 games kind of told their own original story, because remember, that was the second time that Scott thought that the series was going to end, or he said that he wanted the series to end. I'm sure he did. The same way that Disney wants all of the Star Wars movies to end, right? After Episode 9, they're just going to shut down the whole production. They have no more creative ideas. The series is done, because they've already told their full story. But then, Sister Location kind of makes sense for it to take place maybe a little later in the timeline. Not after FNAF 3, obviously, because William has already been spring-locked. I don't think that he was in the Spring Bonnie costume talking to the CEO, that's implied to be the CEO or whatever the heck it was, board member is usually what we call him, at the beginning of Sister Location. But just like, what about 1990? You know, that I'm not saying that's the date. I'm just saying, like, that seems like a more realistic date to me than, you know, the Fun Times were around in 1980. And then let's talk about Elizabeth's youthfulness, which isn't... The thing about this is that, let's say that she was, you know, let's say she was 5 in FNAF 4. I think I said a different number earlier. It doesn't matter. This is a hypothetical. If she was 5 when Dave was bitten, and she did... Well... See, I'm already kind of giving away what I think. But let's say she was, you know, young in the cutscenes when Dave was walking around crying. Then she couldn't have died, like, much later in the timeline. But there's no real proof that she was already dead by the time that those FNAF 4 8-bit minigames played. So, to me, it just doesn't make sense that Elizabeth was killed before Dave. There is a chance that what Dave saw, the thing that made him cry, the thing that psychic friend Fredbear was like, remember what you saw, maybe it was his sister getting got. But the thing about that is both Scott told us that the thing that Dave saw, what Scott said was that what children see in the shadows are easily misunderstood. Easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. I'm sorry I don't have the exact quote in front of me. But that to me implies that what Dave saw was something that was not, you know, a murder or something. It was something normal that he misinterpreted. And then the second point about, you know, Dave seeing Elizabeth get got is that if Circus Baby truly had this, like, child detector device, right? I think it would be very likely that Circus Baby would see him. Now, maybe it wasn't like a radar, maybe it was like a visual thing, like maybe Dave was like behind a trash can or he was looking in through a window or something. Maybe he's like in those spy movies when they're about to get scanned by the drone and they quickly hide and the scan doesn't see them. Maybe Dave was like that. But I still just don't think that there's enough evidence to say that Circus Baby was, well, so that Elizabeth was first in the timeline. Very sorry, Elizabeth, you didn't make the cut for first important death in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Congratulations, I guess? Okay, so number 2, or maybe number 3, depends on if you're counting up or down. Next up, who I think is the second least likely, is Susie. Now, we have some evidence that maybe Susie was the first victim. Withered Chica's line in Ultimate Custom Night, she states that, I was the first, I have seen everything. And second, we see Susie's death, it's directly shown to us with the Fruity Maze minigame, and if she is important enough to get her own minigame, that might be important enough to say this was William's first victim. And then Help 1-2 has the 6 graves that you need for one of the endings. I'm going to call it the good ending, even though neither of those endings are particularly good for whoever we're playing as. Maybe his name is Jeremy. Maybe his name is Wonderfluff because maybe this was a dog that got put into the mind of a human, because that's not the weirdest thing that the series could have ever done. I'm getting sidetracked. Grave order. We have the 6 graves you have to light up in order. It goes Chica, then Foxy, Freddy, Bonnie, Fredbear, Puppet. So, Chica was the first in that order. Graves are obviously associated with death. Let's go through this list of evidence and see what happens. With Withered Chica's voice line, I think it's very important to remember what I said at the beginning of this essay. We are not looking for the first murder. We are looking for the first death. And so Withered Chica saying that, she was the first. What if she was referring to she was the first murder? Then that would mean that the accidental deaths, if you want to think that Elizabeth was an accidental death, I personally do, but Elizabeth and Dave, who were killed via accident, they would be able to be earlier than what Withered Chica considers the first. Also, is she talking about the first murder of William Afton's in the entire timeline, or is she saying she was the first MCI victim? I like first MCI victim. I don't know if we necessarily have any proof that she was the first of those 5. Again, we have the grave order, which we'll get to in a second. But when she says I was the first, I don't think she meant I was the first person, the first child to die, the first ghost to come around. Seeing everything is a weird line because everything implies everything. She's seen all of the deaths, all of the murder, all of the tricks, all of the deception. But that could just be a red herring, right? Scott likes to give us pieces of information that aren't necessarily true. And maybe, for whatever reason, maybe Withered Chica's line is about she saw everything related to the MCI, which is not how you would naturally read that or understand that line, I don't think. But also, here's a thought. I can't remember, some other theorist mentioned this, can't remember who, but what if Susie, was the girl who had the broken toy in the FNAF 4 8-bit minigames? Maybe she lives in the neighborhood around Dave's house, so maybe somehow she saw everything, like the deaths and stuff. Maybe she saw, Dave get chomped. Maybe she saw William's, descent into madness, if that's what happened to him, if he wasn't already mad to begin with. But, I don't know, man. Let's look at this another way. Instead of arguing against what that line could have meant, I was the first, I've seen everything. We know, well, not know, but in every instance of the MCI that we've seen, in the Silver Eyes, in Return to the Pit, in, everything that we've seen, the MCI always happens in 1985. And the Big Bite was 1983. So, it doesn't matter how good the evidence is for Chica dying first, so long as the MCI happened in a week time and not over the course of several years, she's just already disqualified, right? And then in the same game where we got Withered Chica's line, which I'm not going to repeat a third time, but we also got Toy Chica's high school years, right? So if you're going to say Withered Chica's line points to something, you have to look at all the other evidence in that same game. And Toy Chica mentions in her second cutscene, she's like, "Oh, I'll mention her dog being run over, and I'll call her over to me, or I'll call them over to me because they'll be so worried about their dog, and that's when I'm gonna get them." And that closely resembles how Susie got. But that was Toy Chica's second cutscene. Before that was the first cutscene where she said I'll ask for help on my homework. But if I'll ask her my homework is another of William Afton's murder victims, then Susie can't be the first, because there was the homework person. So, I just think that there's way too much evidence that Susie was not the first. I'm fine with her being the first MCI victim. The grave order is very interesting, but everything about Susie being first feels like a red herring and or a yellow chicken. Hey Faz friends, it's Editing Joel here. I've come back from the future, or the future compared to when I recorded the original script, and I'm here now. While editing, I realized that I laid out the Elizabeth arguments I put them in a list. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and then I talked through why I didn't think that those were strong enough evidence to say that Elizabeth died first. And I started the Susie section by laying out, here's 3 points. Point A, the voice lines. Point 2, the fruity maze. And point 3, the help 1 to 2 grave order. But then, when I was editing, I realized that not only did I only kind of really address the first point, I think my counter argument sort of proves all 3 of them wrong, but I still laid out 3 points and I really only addressed the first one directly, so I wanted to do that. And I also realized that somehow I didn't bring up the grave order. I was like, oh, maybe I didn't bring it up here. Maybe I will bring it up when I start talking about Dave and Charlie. And spoiler alert, I don't bring it up there either. So let me insert here what I should have said when I was originally recording. Number 2, the fruity maze showing us a significant death. This goes back to the argument that I was already making, that Susie's death is significant as the first of the MCI, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she was the first death overall. If you think of each minigame as a significant, potentially death, right? Midnight Motorist is up in the air, but we definitely see a death in Security Puppet, and we definitely see a death in Fruity Maze. I think it's safe to assume that 3 is also related to someone who got. They can't all be the first death, because there's 3 of them, right? So again, I think that Fruity Maze is pointing to the fact that Susie was the first killed, and I think that it was also Scott just giving us an example of how he lured children to the back. It's not like he went up to them, grabbed them by the hand, and dragged them kicking and screaming into the back room, and then no one ever saw him again, right? Number 3, the grave order. Now, like I said, the grave order does make sense to be the order of deaths. I mean, graves, that's what they represent. That is always what they represent. However, because we're pretty sure that the MCI was in 1985, and because we're pretty sure that Charlie died in 1983, wait for the Charlie section to see why I say that if you don't already believe it, I just don't think that the grave order can possibly be telling us the order that they were killed in. Unless there's something about the timeline I don't understand, I think we have to think of the grave order in a different light. I know I've heard other theorists say that the grave order might be the order that they were released in, that their spirits went to the great beyond, or whatever it's called in the FNAF universe. And that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because the puppet was the last of the 6 spirits, the last of the 6 graves. So if the puppet was the one that kind of put together Happiest Day, then maybe the puppet was the last one to go, sort of like letting women and children off the ship first, right? Like maybe Charlie stayed there and watched Susie, Jeremy, Fritz, Cassidy, and oh no, how did I forget? Oh no, I'm a fake FNAF fan. But you know, Gabriel, that's right, inside Freddy. But maybe Charlie just let them go, and then once she was sure they had moved on, maybe that's when the puppet moved on. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, in summary, I'm already going to talk about this, or I already have talked about this, that I don't think Susie was the first, mostly because of the 1985-1983 timeline thing, and I think Susie was the first of the MCI. But I just wanted to go back, cross my T's, dot my I's, make sure that I actually said everything that I meant to say. It's in the written script. I don't know how it didn't make it into the recording. Thank you, and we now return to Past Joel. So, thank you very much, Susie. We appreciate your application to be considered the first death in the series, but we've decided to go with another candidate. Thank you for your time. These last 2 possibilities, they're a lot stronger in my mind. And instead of trying to tackle them each one at a time, I think I'm going to kind of just discuss the pair together and see what we can determine. And remember, we're looking at Dave, whose name might not be Dave, and we're looking at Charlie, who might not be named Charlie. I know that there's the Charlie door in Security Breach, but who knows what that means? Maybe they misnamed it something. Maybe there's 2 characters named Charlie, or I guess not 2 characters. Maybe there's a character in the Silver Eyes trilogy named Charlie, and then there's a girl in the video games named Charlie, but maybe they're not the same character. In FNAF 6 and Pizza Sim, Henry does not say the name of his daughter, he just says, my daughter. Also, we don't know that the man who's recording the tapes is named Henry. His name was Henry in the books, but we never get a name from him. And the little audio file is labeled HRY. Where did the letter N go? So, my personal headcanon is his name's just Harry. you know? I'm going to keep calling him Henry, probably, because that seems to be the fandom's consensus on what he should be named. We don't have any evidence that his name is Harry, but it's just very funny to be like, haha, his name's Harry. Everyone keeps calling him Henry. Okay, so Charlie died in the 1983... In the 1983. She died in 1983 in the Silver Eye trilogy. I believe that it was originally 1982, and then they changed it to 1983 in like one of the later books, and I don't know if there's an explanation for that, if someone just hit their head and was like, oh, I thought it was 82, but it was actually 83. But she died in 1983. We enter the keypad code 1983 to get the Puppet Poppet, the animatronic that she possesses. That's in Help Wanted 2. But we also know that Dave was 1983. We have all of the 83s on Scott's website before the game released. Started out as 87s. He changed it to 83 because Scott just loves to give us different information and try to hide information in plain sight. But we got those 83s in the source code. We've got the 1983 on the TV and the mini games, which I always thought was the weakest evidence that it was 1983 because, you know, if the copyright was 1983, it could be a later year. It could be 1986 or something. But I think at this point, with all the other supporting evidence, the 1983 on the TV is kind of trying to tell us what year the 8-bit mini games take place. And then we also have a keypad where you enter 1983 in sister location in order to get access to the cameras, I think it was. That's interesting. 2 keypads with 1983. But we're going to ignore that connection because maybe it's nothing? Maybe it's the same method of communicating information in different games. Maybe one of them was a deliberate callback to the other. So we now know that Dave and Charlie died around the same time. So it's going to be a little harder to maybe decipher which one came first. I will say I like the idea that the flowers in the 8-bit minigames might indicate that Dave died in the spring or summer, and we believe that Charlie died close, like in the fall, both because of the Fall Fest posters in the Security Puppet minigame, but also because she died in Halloween, on Halloween in the Silver Eyes trilogy. But like, you could also argue that the flowers aren't meant to communicate what specific time it is. Maybe that's just kind of like a generic way of showing you outside or something. I'd be willing to believe it, but I don't think that it's like the proof that, the timeline is the way that it is. Let's look at Toy Chica's high school years again, right? We already talked about how there's, we didn't talk about how many cutscenes, but there are 6 cutscenes. And 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are probably the MCI. That seems to be the consensus. We think that Susie died the first of the MCI. She matches up with day number 2 or cutscene number 2 with, I'll tell them about my dog. So what's up with the first day? What's up with the person where Toy Chica's like, I'm going to ask them for help on my homework? And even before that, on that first cutscene, there's already a foxy hook in her bag, which could indicate another significant death, another character who's no longer with us. So you could read it either way. The foxy hook could represent Charlie, and then the homework could be Dave, or the hook could be Dave, and the homework could be Charlie. I like that second interpretation. I do, because, asking a family friend for help with your homework, or maybe she needs help with her homework, and you're like, oh, I'll help you. That makes a lot of sense. And the foxy hook would be associated with Mike for obvious reasons. He's Foxy Bro, and then Mike and Dave are closely related to each other, and Mike was the one who got Dave killed. So personally, I think this also points to Dave being earlier in the timeline, but it's not definitive proof. And what we're looking for is we want a silver bullet, something that can just lock it in and make us say, yes, with certainty, this is what I think it is. Just for the sake of full disclosure, of honesty, I know for sure that Ides Fantasy believes that Charlie was the one who promised to put Dave back together. And I do think that the person who's helping set up Happiest Day, I think it makes the most sense for that to be the puppet, for it to be Charlie. And I can't really argue my way out of that being a possibility, that maybe Charlie died first and maybe her death helped the crying child. I know some people have speculated that her death was also what lured the person away in Midnight Motorist, and if the person being lured away was crying child, then obviously that would mean that Charlie died first. I don't have a hard counter to this, but I also don't think that it is really like the strong evidence that you would need in order to prove which death happened in which order. Consider, ghosts have weird relationship with time. Like, we have a magic ball pit that can make you seemingly time travel, but maybe it doesn't maybe it is real time travel. But if it was something related to agony and it was just memories, maybe the I will put you back together didn't happen in 1983 when Dave was dying. Maybe Dave died in 1983, and then maybe Charlie died, let's say, like, I don't know, 2 weeks later. Maybe nothing happened in the ghost void for those 2 weeks. I'm just fanficking over here, but, like, I just don't think that Charlie being the plush is strongly communicated to us. I think that it's a nice theory. I think it fits, but I don't think that, like, we've ever gotten, like, a second piece of confirmation that the ghost plush was haunted by Charlie. Okay, so here's another thing that we can consider. What if we think of the narrative of escalating violence, right? I've already said that I think that the fun times are later in the timeline. You can disagree, but they represent an automatic system of killing. I'm going to build a group of machines that work together to kill a kid. That's pretty violent. That's pretty meticulously, like, planned ahead of time. And then you have the I'm going to kill 5 people. That's a major event. That's a lot of death to do. And then Charlie's death being a single isolated murder, unless she technically counts as part of the MCI, but Susie was first, so I don't think that's true. But, you know, a single murder, possibly a murder of passion, and then before that you have an accident. You know, none of us are going to say that Dave was really murdered. Maybe Mike was pushed into it, if you believe in the fear experiments. Maybe Crying Child saw another death before that. Maybe that was an accident. But, like, there's nothing to say that, like, anyone wanted Dave to die. Mike didn't want Dave to die. Mike just thought it was like a funny ha-ha prank. Maybe he got too into the moment. He got pushed by his friends to escalate or something like that. And I don't think that William planned for Dave to be killed in the mouth of Fredbear. So, like, see that? See the kind of argument? You start with, like, an accidental death, then you get a single murder of passion, and then you get, like, a murder in person, but it was still a lot of people, and then you get robots that are murdering people. That makes sense to me, that order of progression. But is that definitive proof? I keep coming back to that word. I keep coming back to the idea. And no, I don't think that any of this solidly points to one person being the person who died first. But then I recently had an idea, and this idea honestly was the origin story of this essay. If I hadn't had this thought, I would not have come up with this theory, this explanation, whatever you want to call it. Have you ever thought about the first 4 Five Nights at Freddy's games? If you really think about it, maybe you have to squint a little bit, but, like, if you think of it as a narrative, what if each game was meant to introduce a specific character? Now, the reason I had this idea was because I was thinking of the puppet being, like, the one really new character that was added. Mangle is kind of a play off of Foxy. We have the toys, which are based off of the original animatronics. I guess Balloon Boy and JJ were also introduced in that second game. But, like, if you think about it, the first game introduced the 5 ghosts, the MCI, and the 5 band members. 4 band members and the weird, broken, yellow Freddy that was in the corner. But then FNAF 2, we get the puppet, and as I said, Balloon Boy and JJ, if you want to count them. Mangle is kind of its own thing, even if he is based off of Foxy. I don't think that you can really call her a new character, really, like a half new character kind of a thing. FNAF 3 would be able to be the introduction of Springtrap. Oh, and 2 would be the introduction of Purple Guy. So 2 introduces the Purple Guy, 3 introduces the Purple Guy in his next transformation, his Super Saiyan 2 form, and then FNAF 4 obviously introduces Mike/Foxy Bro as a character. You know, maybe we've been playing as him this whole time, but we don't really know anything about him specifically. So now we get a face, we get a Foxy Mask guy, and we get Dave the Crying Child. And even if you think about it a little bit further than that, Sister Location introduces quite a few weird animatronics. The Biddy Babs, I hate them, and the Minarinas, I hate them too. Blora, Circus Baby, but Circus Baby is the principal one. And then 6, it introduces Tape Guy, and maybe sort of it introduces the Molten MCI as like a really like core concept. Let's ignore Molten Freddy. That's neither here nor there. You have 6 games that introduce a new character. You could maybe say that 7 introduces Ultimate Custom Night introduces Old Man Consequences, but he was in FNAF World. Abort mission, right? I keep spiraling. So you have this idea that each of the first 6 games introduces new characters. Ultimate Custom Night kind of breaks this flow a little bit, but it was supposed to be the 4th finale to the series, so you might as well just not introduce anyone if you're going to actually end it for real. You don't need to introduce a new character. But then, if every game kind of introduces a character, could we also consider each game an origin story? The first one tells us about the MCI. Okay, I already talked about that. The second one is sort of the origin story a little bit of the actual murderer, like actually seeing the murders, and it introduces the child that we're supposed to save, who was a him, and then later was a her. Who knows what that's all about? Scott makes small little changes all the time, I think. And then, 3 was the origin story of, like, actually facing the murderer in real time, and 4 is the origin story of Dave and Mike. But also, it could be the origin story of everything, which of course got retconned when they introduced the Fall Fest. But at the time, when 4 came out, 4 was supposed to be the conclusion. And what makes more sense than going earliest in the timeline before anything else that we've ever seen? The origin story of the entire franchise of Five Nights at Freddy's. So the death of Dave, the death of Crying Child, was the origin of everything. And without going into Will cares or Will doesn't care, I think he's a violent psychopath who wants to just kill people because he thinks it's fun. But, like, even ignoring that, this could be the motivation for him to start killing other people. This is the origin story for Mike deciding to go out and try to help people. Maybe not directly, maybe he has several years of grieving, and then maybe he comes out of it and starts doing things. But, like, this is the origin story of everything. Dave's death, necessarily, in my mind, has to be first because it's what set everything into motion. 4 is Dave's origin story, and his origin story is also his death. And this idea could also feed into God Victim, in which case his death also caused, the field to exist. And it could be what caused the entire pizzeria to be haunted. And it could be what's causing Ralph's weird memory problems in the week before. That's so weird that every time he leaves the restaurant, he sort of remembers that he doesn't like the restaurant because he tells Capellia to not go. But he also, goes back and he's like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then the moment he sits down, he goes, oh, this is horrible. I hate this. And so it makes the most sense from a narrative perspective. 4 is the origin of everything, and therefore, Dave has to be first. Plus, I personally believe that Happiest Day was for Dave. I've never quite understood the idea that it could be for anyone else. But if they're going to do Happiest Day for Dave, then that means that 3 and 4 are polar opposites. One's the furthest in the timeline, one's the earliest in the timeline, one ends with Dave's death, and when the spirits are freed, that's because they all came together and they gave him Happiest Day. Or maybe you decide that 4 is going to be the end, and then you retcon it and say that actually Happiest Day didn't work because otherwise it doesn't make sense that there'd be more monsters, and I need there to be more monsters because I want more games. So, thank you, Scott. Thank you for making everything clear as mud. Thank you for making this franchise completely transparent, and thank you for giving us a story that we can all understand and enjoy. But let me know what you thought about this long, rambling essay, me just kind of yapping about different characters and different events in the Five Nights at Freddy's games. Do you prefer to look at these games as like a narrative, like what is Scott trying to tell us? Or are you one of those people who takes a more Watsonian approach that you can only take what the games say as canon and then try to reverse engineer the story from there? Are you an Andrew truther? I'm not. Get him out of the games. He doesn't belong in there. Do you think The Secret of the Mimic will give us, an even earlier death, another wound to be inflicted on someone else? Was Edwin's wound a wound that somehow got Henry's child killed, and then that's what caused everything else to happen? In what year do you think time-traveling Michael Afton will appear with lightning powers in order to fight an agony being that's actually a giant purple alligator wearing bunny ears? And with that, I bid you all farewell.